guys, welcome back to another one. In today's video, we're putting together a 2.5 ounce 10 gauge turkey shell. This is going to be using copper plated, number 4 shot. I got that from Precision Reloading. That is some really good shot. It always seems to pattern well. You guys that know me know that 10 gauge is one of my favorite shotgun gauges, right along with 16 gauge. 10 gauge has a lot of potential. You can take it up to 3 ounces with lead shot, even more with TSS. You can do 2 3/4 ounces of bismuth if you want to. 1 7/8 of steel. You get where I'm going. 10 gauge has a lot of potential for really big, heavy loads. And what we're doing here today, or tonight really, but yeah, this is no different than one of those massive loads I was just talking about. Again, this is 2.5 ounces of copper plated number 4 shot, and it will be moving 1200 FPS, if not a little bit more. So the components we're using today, or again tonight, it's like 5 in the morning right now, but a brand new primed Federal Hull. This has a 209A primer in it, so that's good. Magnum primer is actually best for this load because we're using some little gunpowder, which is a lot slower than Blue Dot or Alliance Steel or Long Shot. This stuff is a wonderful powder for the larger gauges, 16, 20, 12, 10, if you want some big payloads beyond what's considered normal for the gauges. Now, it is a 410 powder mainly. You can also use it in a lot of pistol calibers, and 28 gauge. It's good in 28 gauge for the heavier 28 gauge loads, but there are powders out there that can handle up to 1 5/8 with TSS shot in 28 gauge. This one cannot do it as far as I know. We're using a TPS wad from Ballistic Products. This is my favorite 10 gauge wad, period. It is an absolute menace. I love that wad. We're using a 1/4 inch 20 gauge felt wad. Now, with 10 gauge, the 16 gauge wads fit better, but I don't have any 16 gauge fiber wads, and the felt wads are kind of hard to get a hold of, so 20 gauge it is. Again, this is 1/4 inch felt from Ballistic Products. We're not using a Mylar wrap today because I am out of them. If I had Mylar wraps, I would be using the Ballistic Products My Thin Mylar inside that wad. That can help keep patterns a little bit tighter. It helps with flyers. It also helps with stack height in some loads. But again, I'm out, so we're not using it. And lastly, we're using some Ballistic Products Buffer. This is the ITX Buffer. It has been rebranded to BSB, which I also have. But it is the same product, and I know I've said that 1,000 times. I'm going to keep saying it until I run out of this ITX Buffer. If you haven't seen any of my 10 gauge videos before, well, I don't have a mech press or a Ponsness Warren or anything like that. I'm just using a modified Leload All. This was 12 gauge. I converted it to 10 gauge just by taking a Dremel and opening up the final crimp tube just a few thousandths to fit the larger 10 gauge holes. And I took the shell holder plate off and opened it up with a file and a Dremel to again fit the larger 10 gauge holes. You can see it fits just fine now. And this is a bolt-on depriming punch made by Jim Akers. It is a 12 gauge mech depriming punch, but as you can see, it fits perfect in 10 gauge. When you're depriming 12 gauge with this, it's a little bit tight to get the hull back off. I don't know why that is. You figure this being a 12 gauge punch, it would fit 12 gauge just fine, but it is a little bit tight. This also works for 16 gauge, it being a 2 3/4 inch hull or shorter. The 16 gauge hulls don't come up to this thicker part. It is tapered. It'll deprime 16 gauge just fine. But that's all the mods I've done to the press. Open the final crimp tube up and the shell holder plate and attach this bolt-on depriming punch. That's it. And it is now a fully functional 10 gauge press. The 12 gauge pre-crimp tubes, both the 6 and 8 point, actually will still fit 10 gauge just fine. They do not need modified. You can put the wad guide on here and it will feed 10 gauge target wads like the BP 1044, SP 10, and the old now discontinued PT 1044. Those wads will go right through the 12 gauge wad guide without modification. That being said, if you want to drop powder and shot for 10 gauge with this press, the max you can load with lead shot is 1 7/8. That is the biggest bushing that Lee makes. It's not even really a bushing, it's just a plate that covers the front of the bushing holder. I don't know what it's called, but yeah, it just stops the lead shot from pouring out the front. Basically, if you want to load larger payloads with lead shot, you can absolutely use the powder bushings to drop your powder, and then you have to load 2 ounces and up by hand. I do use a mech resize ring to resize my 10 gauge hulls on this. The 10 gauge shell goes up in the depriming station of the 12 gauge lead load all without modification just fine, so that fits. And for the extension for the ring, I use a piece of PVC pipe. It's over there, I'll get it in just a second to show you. But it's about 1.5 inches tall and wide enough to, internal diameter is wide enough to fit over a 10 gauge hull. This is what it looks like. Yes, it's cracked. I've used it a lot, but it's just big enough to fit over a 10 gauge shell. Use that on top of the resize ring to resize. But we're not doing any of that today because this is a brand new primed hull. The reason I'm using a Federal hull is because I developed this load using Federal hulls. It actually patterns really, really good. We have tested it out on camera 1 or 2 times. If you don't have any Federal hulls, well, you can fire your factory Federal hulls and use it, or you can get the Remingtons or Shadites from Ballistic Products and use those. With the Shadite hull, you don't need to change anything as far as stack height goes, but with the Remington, you do need to use a nitro card underneath the wad to build up stack height for the crimp. But anyway, we need 45 grains of little gun. This bottle is almost empty. I go through little gun and long shot like it's water. 45 grains. That was 42. I still can't find my powder dipper, but that's fine. That says 45. Double check it as always, and yes, we have 45 grains. I'm still using my homemade shot and powder dipper. This is a cut down 32 gauge shell, hot glued to an ink pen tube, and it works just fine. Next, we need the TPS wad. This one is unslit. I buy most of my wads unslit because I like a little bit shallower slit depth than what the pre-slit ones are. Using Gary Caskey's 4-pedal adjustable 10 gauge wad slitter. Facebook.com/Gary.D.Caskey if you want any of his tools. He makes wad slitters, wad trimmers, hull trimmers, and lots of other cool stuff. But how this works is you just set it on your hull, get it centered, and push down. Just like that, we have, my camera is now glitching out. I don't know if you guys caught that, but how it works is you just center it up and push down. That's all it is, and we now have a 4-pedal 3/4 cut on the wad. Just pull it back off. I have no idea why my camera's been doing that lately. I'm just using an iPhone. It probably just needs updated. I don't have the latest software update installed, and that's probably what it is. TPS wad, get that seated inside your hull. These actually fit really nice in the Federal hulls, and go ahead and send that home with the repriming punch. I don't know if you can see it, but the wad is exactly where we need to be for the crimp. Next, we need the 20 gauge 1/4 inch felt wad. Drop that inside there, and again, you're going to want to use the primary seating punch to compress that wad down just a little bit. So next, we need 2.5 ounces of copper plated number 4 shot, or any size lead shot you want. Shot size doesn't matter. It's all about the payload weight, as Wade Rush puts it. Now I'm loading 2.45 ounces here and buffering it up to 2.5 ounces, although you could, with this load, just load the straight 2.5 ounces and still use the buffer, because the 45 grain charge is the charge for a 3 ounce load. But we're not loading 3 ounces today, we're just doing 2.5, because it all fits in the TPS wad just fine with cushion. Slight correction, guys. Whenever I loaded this before, I think I used the copper-plated number 6 shot, and all of that did fit in the wad. This is overstacked by about, I don't know, a layer of pellets. I'll try to show you. 95% of that shot is in the wad. That's okay. We are still at the right height for a crimp. I put a few more pellets in this just to get it to the 2.5 ounce mark. In terms of grams, that would be a roll over. Come on. 70.8 gram load. You might as well just call it 71 gram load. In terms of grains, that would be 1,093 grains, so quite hefty. And the difference between 2.45 ounces and 2.5 ounces of this copper-plated number 4 is about 10 pellets, so is it really worth it? I don't know. I mean, it is already a 2.45 ounce load of 4s. That's going to have ridiculous pattern density even with that large shot. But let's see. Ballistic Products ITX Buffer. You could use whatever Ballistic Products buffer you want. I just like the ITX or BSB buffer the best. You just want to buffer it up to 2.5 ounces, which is what I've done here, and then tap it down until the buffer is flush or right below the top layer of pellets. Here's what that looks like. I think you can see it all right. Now, we're ready to crimp this. I'm using the back station of the Lee Lodahl, which is the 6-point crimp. Came out just fine. Maybe could use a little bit more. Try to get that lined up right. Oh yeah, there we go. Right here's about what you want. The center of the crimp is about closed up. Now, what I've got here is the middle crimp station for an OMV press, the Smart Box, I think is what it's called. Yep. I think it's pronounced the Rebasator, something like that. I don't know how to pronounce it, but it has a pressure washer on it instead of the arbor. You would normally chuck this up into a drill press, or the Smart Box. Again, I think that's what it is. But instead of doing that, I just slide it right up into front pre-crimp station of the Lee Lodahl, and I get the door off my other press for the it's the primer cover. Set it right here underneath the front pre-crimp station, and do that right there, and you can see what that does. It domes it. Now when you final crimp this, it's going to look like a factory shell. I gave it a little bit more. Now to final crimp this, just like any other shell on the Lee Lodahl. Well guys, here's how it looks. As you can see, it looks about like a factory shell does. Whenever you use this thing, it flares the crimp, the top of the shell, out a little bit, sort of like a skirt shape. But since this is or was originally 12 gauge, whenever you final crimp it, it tapers it right back in. Now this hull doesn't really have much of a taper on it, but as you can see the top edge, it does have a little bit. This feeds great in my Browning BPS 10, and of course with the single shots it drops straight in, and I would imagine this would feed great in a semi-auto too. That is a really good crimp, and it's pretty much effortless with this thing right here. No need for a gap or anything like that crimp finisher. This is, as you can see, pretty deep set. It's nice and flat. It's not going to come open. It's just a great process to load 10 gauge. Here's a little bit better view of it. As you can see, perfectly even. No issues at all. We are nice and deep set. Again, this is a great looking shell, about like a factory load. And that little hole right there, that's because I didn't quite have enough pre-crimp on it, but a little drop of clear fingernail polish will take care of that. Here's what one of those brand new unprimed Remingtons from Ballistic Products looks like on this thing. That white you see on the left side of the left hole, that's because after I crimped it, I just wanted to see what would happen if you ran it through that one more time, and all it does is cut the plastic a little bit, so don't do that. But yeah, some great looking shells here. This green one is a 4 or 5 time fired, what was this? Nitro steel. That's what that was. They crimp great too. You'll notice the lighter green one is a shorter hull than the new unprimed hulls from Ballistic Products. These are before they're loaded, 3.52 to 3.53 inches, and this is true 3.5 inch, right on the money. If you're concerned about that extra length, Gary does make a hull trimmer 410 gauge. You can trim it down to 3.5 inches even if you want to, or even shorter. I trim my hulls down to 2 7/8 inch sometimes. If you want to see this load being patterned, it was a 30-yard shot, and it is in the Thanksgiving special from 2023. I had a few people ask if I could make a video showing how I put that shell together, so here it is, guys. Hope you enjoyed it. But anyway, I think that's going to do it for me. Please like and subscribe. We always appreciate that. If you have any questions or comments, leave them down in the comment section below and we'll get back to you. And if you want to, go check out our Patreon. It's as low as $1 a month and you guys get early access to content. A link to that, as well as a link to our Instagram and Rumble accounts, will be in the description below. But other than that, you guys take it easy and we'll see you in the next one.